Hi everyone, and welcome to Chapter 3. We are going into Week 4. Can you believe we're almost halfway through? So last week we talked about how we could change our thought patterns, and this week we're actually going to get to practice a little bit of that. So I hope that you enjoy our think tank exercise, and let's get started of looking at hope and reality. There's a lot of information here that I've taken from a lot of the experts, and it doesn't come right out of your book, but it really is a nice parallel to what we're learning in the book. So let's talk a little bit about optimism and hope and what it is. So past research and theorists have portrayed a downside to optimism that relates to weaknesses. So it's really viewed as a weakness in the past. So more recent studies suggest otherwise. So can one side really be right or wrong? So we're going to look at maybe even the upside of pessimism and a little bit of the downside of individuals that are a little too optimistic. So we're going to look at the perspectives and try to understand that it is not one or the other, but a combination of using both optimistic and pessimism to be grounded in reality. The second concept we're going to look at is hope, which, like optimism, has a value in our lives. Hope is a state which promotes the desire of positive outcomes related to events and circumstances in one's life or in the world at large. In other words, it acts as a bridge to possibilities and keeps the channels open to further a journey. All right, let's go to slide 2. Here we are. So one of the things that your book talks about is psychological illusions. And of course, our old friend Freud had to chime in here on the illusions, relating it to his sexual instincts and the idea that illusion was actually a good thing so that people could act them out in their heads rather than being sexually aggressive in real life. A later study talked about the Pollyanna principle of illusion, and by definition, the Pollyannaism implies that you ignore or avoid dealing with negative events and look only for good and denying the bad. However, there is a foundation of positive thinking despite what many might believe. Positive thinking, unlike Pollyannaism, acknowledges both negative and positive events. And I think that's something that we kind of looked at on the discussion boards that you all kind of questioned. You know, how are these differences either biological or the fact that maybe we just don't want to change at times? Is there a value to pessimism? So these are all really good questions that we're starting to answer. So positive thinking means that we are dealing with negative events and allowing the appropriate amount of time for a negative emotion to surface, and then moving from the negativity by focusing on the positive. And this is one thing that I noticed on the discussion boards, that you all were cutting yourself some slack and saying, you know, well, I could have, you know, just acted this way, or it didn't happen for me the first time. And really, we're all going to react in those ways, and I hope that on the discussion boards from last week that you really took away, the fact is that we're all going to have those reactions. We're going to feel them because we fear something. So that initial reaction is basically an alert to us that something is happening and we need to address it. So let's talk about positive illusion. I'll start off with revealing that it's another controversial topic in psychology. Imagine that, controversy in psychology. So we're going to touch on both sides. Some research suggests that positive illusion leads to greater well-being in life. So let's see. I don't know if I want to, and I want you to look in the upper right-hand corner, and we have question 1. Positive illusion can be described as, and you'll see down there I've given you a very nice description on the slide. And so let's just go on, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more to give you a good definition so you can answer that question. So positive illusion can be described as factors that lead to a great capacity to adjust to adversity. So it does help you to overcome. Sometimes it can help you think that you're stronger than you really are. It can help you, you know, have that mindset of I can do it, the little train that could. And so then also there's factors that lead to a greater subjective well-being. In other words, how you view your own well-being, and greater relationship satisfaction. I think that the book gives a pretty good example of that. I think it's our book. But that if you ask individuals who just got married and ask them what are the likelihoods of divorce, it's about 0% that will say that they are likely to get divorced because they have the illusion or the possibility of the future is going to be wonderful and grand. And actually the positive illusions can actually help to pull it in that direction. So the term positive illusion represents a multidimensional psychological dimension consisting of the following three sub-constructs. Self, I don't even know how to say that. Aggrandizement, well, I'm sorry, we're going to move on for that word. But what it means is a self-view of oneself. So illusion of control and unrealistic optimism. And that came out of Taylor and Brown. Unrealistic optimism is the perception that the future holds an idealistic, bountiful array of opportunities and the absence of adverse events, just like we talked about with the newlyweds and their views on divorce. So three common illusions are unrealistic optimism, an exaggerated sense of control, and an overly positive self-evaluation. Tiger in 1979 and Taylor and Brown also claimed that they serve a variety of important functions. People search for ways to increase their self-esteem and pleasure and reject thoughts and situations that will do the opposite. So they filter incoming information and distort reality so that what is negative appears less threatening. And I think that you all can probably sit back and think of an instance where something might have been threatening and you did self-talk and you overcame it. So, really kind of be focusing in on the fact that even though we talk about these positive illusions, that, it is a spectrum. In some ways they're good, but if you use them too much, it can be bad. So if these positive illusions are all that in a piece of cake, why would they be scrutinized? First, we have to understand the concept of illusion. What does illusion mean? A thing that is likely to be wrongly perceived or interpreted by the senses. So here's where it gets tricky, literally. We are tricking ourselves into creating a better world for ourselves by using positive illusion. What the research has indicated is that our minds are actually hardwired to focus on more positive things in reality than the reality of negativity. And I think we saw that on one of Sean Acor's videos too. So let's see, where am I? That goes for our perception of ourself in the past, our sense of control, and our ability to make things better in the future. So now we have to decide if positive illusion is good or bad. Or do we? Do we have to say that it's good or bad, or can we just say that we need to use it in the right time, in the right amount, or the right dose of it? Just like almost everything else in life, we can continuously or by autopilot use positive illusion for the purpose it was intended, to move us in a positive direction. Illusion or not, what would be the alternate of this? So let's look at the impact of optimism bias. So let's see, am I on? Oh, I need to go to, oh no, I'm not on slide 4 yet. So we're still going to take a look at some of the other research by Shelley Taylor, who argued that the bias was an evolutionary adaptation and enabled people to survive under difficult conditions. Sharon added to Taylor's work by suggesting that the majority of the people demonstrate an optimism bias by a margin of 5 to 3.3. In the works of Sharon, in her book, The Optimism Bias, her article, A Tour of Irrationally Positive Brain and Focus, compares optimism bias to other perceptual illusions, such as sometimes fatal spatial disorientation among airplane pilots and other frequently cited optical illusions like the young lady, the old woman. You can get those on the web. the different illusions that you can see, the two profiles or the Thatcher illusion or the vase illusion. So really share it with kind of comparing those to the different types of illusion that sometimes even though we think we see something, the reality might be quite different. An example of optimism bias is the well-known documented superiority illusion, that most people rate their skills, knowledge, and tendencies as above average in a variety of dimensions. Ellen Langer, another researcher from Harvard, who suggested that the pervasive illusion of control that causes most of the people to overestimate their ability to control events, even those in which they have no influence at all. This cognitive bias has been suggested and prevalent among problem gamblers or those who believe in paranormal phenomenon. So I think the best example is looking at the example of the problem gamblers, that they feel like they have a sense of control over the machines and that, you know, their big win is just around the corner. All right, slide 4, here we come. All right, we are going to talk about dispositional optimism and explanatory style. So you can see down here on the bottom, dispositional optimism as opposed to explanatory style is a global explanation or trait of how people regulate themselves to achieve their goals, as opposed to viewing the world and explaining how events happen. So let's look at the definition of dispositional optimism. Say that 5 times fast. It's defining as a global expectation that more good or desirable things than bad or undesirable things will happen in the future. So Shire and Carver looked at a personality trait, and it is presumed to be stable within a little scope for change and is alternatively described as big optimism, and that was described by Peterson. So Peterson described personality characteristics beneficial to change. Or optimism is a mental attitude adopted by people who view and interpret situations in the world as best or optimized. People display this sort of dispositional optimism have many traits and characteristics in common, most of which build on their positive worldviews. Optimism generally benefits the user in many different ways. Optimism is also linked to health conditions and health behaviors in human beings. Thus, optimism contributes to the overall sense of well-being through many different facets in human life. Optimism is associated with many characteristic traits that are beneficial to change throughout the life by contributing to overall well-being. So let's go on and look at what explanatory style is. So it really is just what it sounds like, how you explain things that happen to you. And that can either be from a negative perspective or from a positive perspective. And it can be in the same situation where two people might have different explanatory styles. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in depth. So explanatory style consists of 3 dimensions: the internal versus the external, the stable versus the unstable, and the global versus the specific. The internal, external refers to whether or not a person believes that they have control or influence over the event. So internal would be that they have control over the event, and external would be that the environment influences events going on around us and that we have little control. The stable versus the unstable dimension represents whether a person believes a repeated event will be the same or subject to change. Global versus specific refers to whether or not a person's explanation generalizes the events to others beyond the specific event at hand. For example, the attributional style model believes that if a person has an explanatory style that tends to consider bad events as internal, stable, and global, they are said to have a pessimistic explanatory style, because they see the bad experience or event as one that was their fault, that will not change in the future and is generally problematic rather than specific to that particular event. So, like, for instance, if somebody stumbles down a couple of stairs and they say, oh, I'm so clumsy, I'll never be able to do anything, I'll never, you know, I can't run, I can't do anything. So they see that their own faults, maybe not the fact that, you know, that somebody kind of pushed into them or something. So they see everything as being their fault, and they will generalize or globalize it to not just that situation, but to their life. The optimistic person places no blame on themselves, believes that there is room for change, and that bad experience was specific to that particular event and is not to be generalized to all others. If a pleasing event is experienced, an optimistic would exhibit internal or stable and global explanatory style, whereas a pessimistic would be showing external, unstable, and specific explanatory style. One explanatory style is believed to influence a person's view of the future, and as a result, their projected perceptions and their subsequent behavior. So, however your view is, and don't forget, we did talk about it, and we did an excellent job in this past week of looking at how we could actually change our views just by giving ourselves some options, by recognizing that it's okay to be negative for those first couple of seconds and to hold on to that negativity because it has a purpose, and then to say, okay, where am I going to go from here? So explanatory style really talks about where a person is in that particular moment. And it's not to say that it can't change. Explanatory style or attributional style refers to how people explain events in their lives. So there are the three facets that we talked about, and I am going to give you a couple of good examples here. So a good event, say passing an exam or passing a quiz. So an optimist would say, I've done a great job. That's the internal part. The stable part would be, I am talented. And the global part would be, this was a good start to the exam season. The other ones should be easy too. So a pessimist would say, I don't know how this happened. I must have been lucky. And the unstable part, and of course that's the external part of it, the unstable part of it is every dog has his day. And the specific, so what? I can still fail the next one. So then if we look at a bad event, and see how explanatory style is represented, we look at a bad event of failing the exam. So in the optimist would say, using the external, the exam questions were simply terrible. The unstable would be, no problem, I'll pass it the next time around. And specific would be, yesterday was my birthday after all. So a pessimist would look at this again, and you notice that these are kind of opposite with the internal and external. So now in bad events, the pessimist internalizes it. It's my fault, I haven't prepared well. The stable part of it would be, I'm never going to pass this exam, and the global part of it is, this is the end to my dreams, I'll never become who I want to be. So optimists explain positive events as having happened because of them, internal, and they see them as evidence that more positive things will happen in the future and in other areas of their lives also. Conversely, they see negative events as not being their fault. They see them as flukes or isolated, and that they have nothing to do with areas of their lives. So, really, if you look at this, it is the view that, how can I say this? An optimist leaves everything open, and they don't get down on themselves, and they don't box themselves in. That just because of something either good or bad happens, that it determines their future. So optimists are very open-ended. I think that that's a good way of putting it, and pessimists are very limiting. So what does this mean? So understandably, if you're an optimist, this bodes well for your future. Negative events are more likely to roll off your back, and positive events affirm your belief in yourself, your ability to make good things happen now, and the future, and its goodness in life. Fortunately for pessimists and realists, these patterns of thinking can be learned to a degree. Though we tend to be mostly predisposed predisposed to our patterns of thinking, using a practice called cognitive restructuring, which is exactly what you guys did last week. Lots of fun. And so you can help yourself and others become more optimistic by consciously challenging negative, self-limiting thinking and replacing it with more optimistic patterns. Okay, so let's go on to, where are we? Oh. So here you just have a nice little definition of the two topics that we just talked about: dispositional optimism and explanatory style. Okay, next slide. And so really this is just a good visual to kind of look at how people explain stuff with the information that they take in. And we talked about, let's see, what was it, the dispositional, let me go back one, I'm sorry. So we talked about the dispositional as people have the extent to which a person typically adopts an optimistic or pessimistic look. So we look at their visual basically of how they take information in. And then really when we're talking about explanatory style, it's the verbal aspect of how they tell you what a situation really looks like through their eyes. Okay, so next one we are going on to, oh, I meant to delete that slide. I just thought that was kind of a neat one. So let's just keep going on here. So we are going on to understanding the hope theory and what that is. If you look down at the bottom, you have question 3 down there. The hope theory is described by Snyder and includes which components? So it's the ability to plan pathways to desired goals despite obstacles, and agencies or motivation to use pathways. And I really think that probably the best video that we had to describe that was our Randy Pausch videos, and looking at hope and optimism even when he knew that he had a life-threatening disease. So let's look at what hope is and the definition. So hope, the overall perception that one's goals can be met. According to Snyder in 2000, hope has 3 necessary ingredients. The first is goal-oriented thoughts, non-random human behaviors that are directed by some goal, either short-term or long-term. Goals need to be of sufficient value to the individual so as to occupy conscious thought. Goals should be attainable yet challenging in nature. Goals that are 100% likely to be achieved do not give people hope. The second ingredient is pathways to achievement. In order to achieve goals, people need to generate plausible routes to achieve goals. This type of thought process begins in infancy when cause and effect relationships are first beginning to be understood by these children. Children see that certain actions influence events that occur. Singular or multiple pathways need to be generated. In fact, alternative pathways should be generated when obstacles are faced. Those with the highest level of hope tend to generate multiple pathways to achievement. In other words, hope can also, this is where everything kind of gets interrelated. We talked a little bit about what is pessimism, and then we're talking about hope. And so we're talking about generating multiple pathways. We know with pessimism that you always have a backup plan for things, because if you're overly optimistic and you say, I just hope that somebody comes to pick me up for the dance, that might not happen. But if you make arrangements for a taxi, then that's your backup plan and you know it's going to happen. So this is also the case with hope too. It might be that you generate 2 or 3 different possibilities of how to attain a particular goal. If I want to finish my degree, I can work for a couple of years and get all the money. I can work while going to school. I can try to find grants. So it's just a way that your brain generates all of these different ideas for you. Okay, and the third necessary ingredient is agency thoughts. And this motivational component to hope, people believe that they can initiate and sustain the pathways to the goal achievement. This type of thought begins after 1 year of age, with children realizing that they are actors who can influence their environment and initiate cause and effect relationships. So the emphasis here is on thinking and not emotion, which are a byproduct of hope. Positive emotions equal perceived success in achieving goals. Negative emotions equal perceived failure in achieving goals. So here's some links. So in studies, hope has been linked to higher academic and athletic performance, better adjustment, and better coping with health issues. So when talking about performance, hope is linked to higher standardized achievement test scores, but not scores on intelligence tests. Higher hope and higher GPA are positively correlated. According to Curry, higher hope and increased athletic performance are positively correlated. So another link is adjustment. The level of hope people have is related to their perception about themselves and their goals. People with higher levels of hope remember more positive comments and events about themselves, whereas people with lower levels remember more negative comments and events. People with higher levels of hope feel challenged by goals, whereas people with lower levels feel demoralized by goals. People with higher levels of hope have higher feelings of self-worth. And a link to health. Higher levels of hope are correlated with better coping skills and higher levels of pain tolerance. For spinal cord injury patients and adolescent burn survivors, those with higher levels of hope showed better coping with problems, less depression, fewer harmful to recovery behaviors, and interacted better with caregivers. Using a cold pressor test, Snyder and Brown, found that higher hope correlated positively with less perceived pain and greater endurance for pain. For cancer patients, higher hope was related to greater knowledge and better coping skills with the disease. Okay, and this just gives us a little bit of a visual on what they're doing. I know a lot of you have asked me about post-traumatic stress and a few of the other things that are related to either resilience or hope or a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. And so if you look down in the bottom corner, you can see really this is how the growth model or the GROW model works with individuals, and this is actually used in psychotherapy. The other one, which is the 8 steps of coaching, now we have a lot of individuals who are taking the MAP programs, which is the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology, and a lot of them are coming out and are being life coaches. And this is one step here that when you look at growth, there's the acronym, goals, reality, options, will, tactics, and habits. And so this is really one of the things that they use in therapy to help people who maybe want to overcome something or just even want to increase their performance. They might be just fine, feel fine with their performance, but that they just want to bump it up a little bit. And if you look over onto the right, it shows here that how post-traumatic stress can cause a person to lose hope. So if we know that individuals who are going over to Afghanistan or who are going, or just, anywhere, even they have family members now that are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress just because of the whole experience. And then also there's, women and men who go through maybe either have been battered or sexually molested, et cetera, et cetera. So post-traumatic stress can really relate to a number of different things. But if we know that these individuals are going to lose hope, then by implementing some of these strategies to help them keep hope or to increase hope is really going to benefit them in the long run. And this is just what we just talked about, where all the benefits that can come out of increasing hope or making sure that we maintain hope. Okay, so did we go on? Did we have question 4 yet? I don't think so. Okay, well let's look. Oh, no, there it is, question 4. So studies have found areas in the brain that are linked to optimism and pessimism. So do you think our brains have anything to do with it? Remember, we keep talking about, and Sean Acor keeps talking about, that we're hardwired. So absolutely, our brains have a lot to do with optimism and pessimism. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. And so the rostral anterior cingulate, cingulate is part of the brain's frontal cortex. So for all you medical individuals out there, if I pronounce these wrong, please forgive me. So it's part of the brain's frontal cortex that may be involved in regular emotional responses. The amygdala is an almond-shaped brain structure in the medial temporal lobe that is also involved in emotion. So really what they've done is researchers and doctors have pinpointed areas that we know are involved with emotion. So what does that mean? When those areas of the brain are stimulated, and this is very individual for everybody, that something is going to happen. So understanding healthy optimism is important because it relates to mental and physical health and to success. So we can have people who are not necessarily depressed, but have different levels of optimism. So, you know, just like we talked about in the first week, I think we're all getting into that mindset that there is no definite definition for a lot of this because we're dealing with very individual human emotions, behaviors, and wiring biologically and neurologically. So, I don't know if it was on screen. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go forward. Oh, I didn't put I thought I had put the book reference on here, but I guess not. Okay, there was a good book that I wanted to reference, and I think it's called Sunny. Oh, it's in one of your videos. It's called Sunny Brain, Rainy Brain. Yeah, I think it's called Sunny Brain, Rainy Brain. So the book is Why We Understand the Neurological Aspects of Optimism and Pessimism. So Elaine Fox is a current fellow at Oxford and director of neuroscience. So she's definitely well versed in what she knows how the brain works. And she's been head of the Department of the Psychology at the University of Essex and is an associate editor of the leading scientific journal of emotional, cognitive, and emotion. Emotion and cognition and emotion. And so she has written a book on optimism and pessimism and how the brains are wired. So are you optimistic or pessimistic? Glass half empty or half full? Do you look at the bright side or do you turn to the dark? These are easy questions for most of us to answer because our personality type is hardwired into our brains. As pioneering psychologists and neurologists, Elaine Fox has discovered our outlook on life reflects our primal inclination to seek pleasure or avoid dangerous inclinations that many people are healthily balanced. But when our fear brain or our pleasure brain is too strong, the results can be disastrous. And those of us suffering from debilitating shyness, addiction, depression, or anxiety know this all too well. Luckily, anyone suffering from these afflictions has reason for hope. Stunning breakthroughs in neuroscience have shown that our brains are more malleable than we ever imagined. In the rainy brain, sunny brain, Fox describes a range of techniques from traditional to cognitive behavioral therapy, innovative cognitive bias retraining, exercises that can actually alter our brain's circuitry, strengthening specific thought processes by exercising the neural system that controls them. And so I'm not going to read through all the rest of her stuff, but what I want to talk about just a little bit before moving on to the next one is the idea of positive thoughts. So for this week, our exercise is to go out and in one day to generate 10 of those items that we have on our list in the think tank and to do them. And the reason why we're doing them all in one day is because we're trying to keep the level of positivity or positiveness up. And so it's going to show us that how if we focus on positive, how it can just kind of keep perpetuating, generating positive feelings. So the power of positive thoughts. So let's understand that, because that's really what our exercise is all about this week. Your thoughts form your character, how you operate in the world, how far you travel mentally, physically, and spiritually. You are what you think and are, and all of your actions proceed from your thoughts. Your inner thoughts will always be reflected in your outer circumstances, because self-generated changes in your life are always preceded by changes in the way you think about something. So as far as your brain, every thought releases brain chemicals. Being focused on negative thoughts effectively saps the brain of its positive forcefulness and slows it down, and can go as far as dimming your brain's ability to function, even creating depression. On the flip side of that, thinking positive, happy, hopeful, optimistic, joyful thoughts decreases cortisol and produces serotonin, which increases a sense of well-being. This helps your brain function at peak capacity. And this is another thing that Sean Acord talked about in one of his videos, was the fact that even just giving somebody a little something that was positive and they thought about it, oh my goodness, I got a gift, this is so great, that it really turned their thinking around, and there was benefits even to learning or to the ability to take a test or the ability to perform, because that's what they did, was they gave the candy to doctors. So happy thoughts and positive thinking in general support brain growth, as well as the generation and reinforcement of new synapses, especially in your prefrontal cortex, which serves as the integration center of all your brain mind functions. So, you know, a lot of you said, well, do I have to be happy all the time? And, you know, of course, nobody in life is going to be happy all the time. That would just be ridiculous to even assume that a person could go through life without having negative emotions. But the idea is that understanding on a day-to-day basis that we do have the ability that if, I don't know, if life sucks one day and, you know, the day is just going really bad, it's just to say, oh my gosh, I need a time out, I need to refocus my brain, I'm going to go watch a movie. And so just to get yourself out of the mindset. It's not that you have to go out and, you know, be happy, happy, joy, joy, smile at everybody. That's not the intent of it. The intent of it is to refocus the brain into a more positive state. And so, which is really what we're going to be working on this week. So why optimism leads to greater happiness? Neuroscientists have discovered that people who have more cheerful dispositions are more prone to optimism, generally have higher activity occurring in their prefrontal cortex. But that's the brain's explanation. Interestingly, behaviorists have observed fascinating differences between optimism and pessimism. Optimism, for example, involves high desirable cognitive, emotional, and motivational components. Optimistic people tend to have better moods, be more persevering and successful, and to experience better physical health. One factor may be simply that the optimists attribute good events to themselves in terms of permanence, and citing their own traits and abilities as the cause, and bad events as transient. And so using words like sometimes or lately, or the fault of other people. In addition, optimists lead happy, rich, fulfilled lives, spend the least time alone, have good relationships, have better health habits, have stronger immune systems, and live longer than pessimists. And I think that was something that came out of that Nun study that we looked at. So on the flip side of pessimism, pessimistic people explain good events by citing the transient causes such as moods and effort, and bad events as permanent conditions, using words like always and never. So pessimists automatically assume bad setbacks are permanent, pervasive, and due to personal failings. Are 8 times more likely to be depressed than optimists, perform worse at school, have rockier relationships, and die sooner than optimists. So if, you know, longevity is something that you're going for, and you want to be a centurion, then you better be an optimist. All right, so let's look at, let me see if we're moving on here. I know that you know, I'm taking up a little bit of time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we can train our brain before we move on. So one of the oldest, one of the oldest percepts of neuroscience has been that our mental process or thinking originate from brain activity. That our brain is in charge of when it comes to creating and shaping our mind. However, more recent research has shown that it can also work the other way around, that focused, repetitive mental activity can affect changes in your brain structure and wiring capabilities. So now what we're finding through science is that, you know, if we want to be hardwired different, that we have the capability to take some of those wires and move them to different places so that we can perpetuate those pleasant thoughts or the more optimistic thoughts. The actions we take can literally expand or contradict different regions of the brain, firing up circuits or tamping them down. The more you ask your brain to do, the more cortical space it sets up to handle the new task. It responds by forging stronger connections in circuits that underline this desired behavior or thought of weakening the connections in others. Thus, what you do and what you think, see, or feel is mirrored in the size of your respective brain regions and the connections your brain forms to accommodate these needs. So what does all that mean? It means that what we think, do, and say matters, that it affects who we become on the outside and inside and in our brains. Mostly it means that you can retrain your brain to be more positive. And I hope that our little exercise this week that we're going to find some of those positive benefits. All right, so we have just a couple more slides here. And let's see. This one, it just kind of shows you the different brain regions and what they do. I'm going to let you guys go over that one. I'm going to get you through these next couple of slides here. So look up in the right-hand corner. The research shows that it is good to be optimistic all the time, and there is no negative repercussions to being overly optimistic. So can you think of an issue of being overly optimistic? What might happen if a person just sits down on their couch and says, you know, I hope that somebody just knocks on my door and gives me $1 million. So that would be probably a little bit overly optimistic. Or if you wanted your dream job, would you just expect somebody to call you on the phone and give it to you? Probably not. So what we know is that there are benefits to being a little pessimistic. You all talked about this too in the discussion last week, that the pessimists or those little negative emotions, they have a purpose. And what it does is it keeps us grounded. So let's look a little bit about why it's good to be a pessimist. Let me move on to here. Okay. So there are some occasions when pessimism can do more to ensure the safety of life. Optimistic thinking is associated with an underestimation of risk. So optimists are more likely to take part in high-risk activities such as unprotected sex or reckless driving. Optimism is also hardly desirable if, for example, a pilot is deciding whether a plane should take off during an ice storm. So in the case of serious traumatic events, death, fire, flood, or violent rape, these sort of awful things, optimists may not be well prepared in their beautiful, rosy world, may be shattered into pieces, although optimists might be better equipped to rebuild than pessimists. So what about realism? So we've talked about grounded in reality. So this is another difficult question to answer, simply because realism does not seem to be in fashion at the moment. Having carefully analyzed the indexes of 5 major volumes of positive psychology, I found only one to refer to this term. If a principal motivation of realists is to understand themselves and the world, and is to maintain a consistent and accurate self-image, it would be common sense to assume that such disposition could benefit from the strengths of both optimism and pessimism, while avoiding the pitfalls associated with both. So Ed Diner, one of the greatest researchers on happiness, writes, "It might not be desirable for an individual to be too optimistic. Perhaps people are better off if they are mixed of optimism and pessimism. We need more research in order to understand better what helps one to develop realism and the implications of such choice are." So perhaps our Western societies need some realists. Those who watch the news feel that the suffering around the world and assume some responsibility for causes and implications of this adversity. Those who may choose to do something about it, realistically estimating their minute chance of success. So, is there any hope? Hope is constructed closely related to optimism. Although the two are not identical, Rick Snyder, one of the leading specialists in hope, represents its ability to conceptualize goals, find paths of these goals despite the obstacles, and have motivation to use those pathways. To put it more simply, we feel hope if we know, one, know what we want, two, can think of a range of ways to get it, and three, to start and keep it going. So it's not hard to guess that being hopeful brings about many benefits, just like we talked about with optimism. For example, we know that hope buffers against interfering deprecatory thoughts and negative emotions and critical psychological health. In the domain of physical health, we know that people who are hopeful focus more on prevention of disease through exercising, such as athletes with higher levels of hope are more successful in their performance. Furthermore, based on research with college students, it appears that hope bears a substantial relationship to academic achievement. Snyder and his colleagues emphasize the cognitive rather than the emotional approach to hope, claiming that positive emotions are a result of concluding that we are pursuing goals successfully. This means that they see hope and goal pursuit thinking that causes the emotions. As often happens in psychology, many other researchers would not subscribe to this view, conceptualizing hope as emotion in itself. Okay, so I just went over a little bit of the different sides of looking at the hope and optimism, and I hope that you got from this that this is just like everything else, a continuum, and there's different sides to it. And so what we try to do is we try to look at these different sides, and we try to look at what the benefits are of each one to understand human behavior and how we can change human behavior in a way that is a more positive for individuals. But recognizing that, you know, you can't just put on rosy glasses and just hope that everything is going to be wonderful. So that concludes the slide presentation for this week. I am really, really excited about our exercise for this week, and I can't wait to talk to you all in the think tank. So have a great week, and I'll be talking to you soon.